I found it interesting earlier when you were talking about what Anthony Lake said, and you said China would not have been successful had they followed that model. Because you seem to be implying, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that democracy or more individual liberty would have been incompatible with China advancing the way it has advanced. And when I was here in the 1990s, living in Hong Kong and traveling around Southeast Asia, I heard a lot of this talk about Asian values, that Asians are somehow different than the U.S. And Westerners that they prefer a paternalistic style of leadership. They don't care about things like individual rights. They only care about the country, the family first, and then the society. But we put too much emphasis on individual rights. I've been hearing that Asian values thing for decades now, mostly by prime ministers in Malaysia and Singapore. When I hear this stuff, it's usually to justify one party's continued hold on power by saying our people don't care about democracy. They only care about paternalistic rule as long as it's benevolent. And when you have the mandate of heaven, you can rule. I've always said that's bunk because, I go back to the idea that there are some values that are universal. And I think they're enshrined pretty nicely in the Declaration of Independence. And just if you look at those words, we're endowed with certain inalienable rights, including, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it's not just that these are American values somehow. I think somehow these are universal values that are applied everywhere. Ho Chi Minh quoted those same, universal values when he was declaring independence for Vietnam. And if you look now, and I'm not saying that everybody has to have a system that looks like the American system. I'm not saying that at all. So when I say democracy, I'm talking small d. It can look differently in different places. But it seems to be the trend that has swept the globe. To me, the most exciting thing of the last 20 years is how democracy has taken root in places like Latin America, Central America. I think Cuba is the only one now that's not somehow having elections. In Africa, where I covered, you can't get away having coups anymore. I mean, even in Zimbabwe recently, they had to say, this is not really a coup. Now most countries are at least pretending to have some kind of democratic election to legitimize their rule. Even in Asia, look around. In Thailand, they're pushing ahead for an election this year to justify. In Cambodia, even Hun Sen, who's been in power 30 years, still has to go through the motions of having some kind of popular legitimacy. So I don't buy the notion that somehow democracy and this idea of individual rights is just a Western concept that we're trying to push onto people, including China.
Well, I think it's more basic than values. I think it's about what works. So let's take a look at the last 30 years. I call it the Great Conversion. Since 1990, I think in the 80s, according to the Freedom House, there were about 47, 50 democracies. Today, there are about 150. Okay, we had electoral democracy elections and what have you. And according to the Wall Street Journal Heritage Foundation, the number of countries that went from not free market to free market has quadrupled. Okay, so never before in human history, never has so many countries abandoned whatever political and economic system they had and adopted something completely new. Never before. Okay, so I call it the Great Conversion. And now 30 years have passed. And let's take a look at the track record of the Great Conversion. Okay, I grouped them into three groups. The first group was the luckiest one. That's the former Soviet states in Eastern Europe. Okay, those were the most Western, especially in Eastern Europe. That got quickly integrated into Europe, got access to big market. Okay, there are about 29 countries in that group, including Russia itself. If you examine the luckiest group, okay, with a few exceptions, Czech Republic, maybe Poland, maybe Hungary, who are now regretting, about 2/3 of these countries are in horrible shape. The former Soviet, the Ukraine being the worst, okay, not livable, failed state, okay. And look at the stance. Most of Eastern Europe, not in good shape, okay? And that's the luckiest group. The second group that converted into electoral democracy and market capitalism were places like Taiwan, South Korea. Those are places that achieved developed world status under dictatorships or authoritarian regimes. So they got rich before they democratized. Right? So they didn't rise under democracy. They rose under dictatorial or authoritarian regimes, and they achieved developed country status, and then they democratized. Out of that group, 50-50 at best. Okay? South Korea continues to thrive, but Taiwan has deteriorated in the last 20, 30 years, the medium income has been dropping. It's completely stagnant. Okay, politics is poison. People are not happy. So it's 50-50. And then you look at the largest group, the so-called developing world, from Southeast Asia to Africa to Latin America, all those countries you mentioned. None of them has been successful. I mean, you'll be hard-pressed to find one shining example of success. And the biggest success, of course, is China, who didn't do it. Okay. So I think it's more basic than values and cultures. I mean, I think Chinese people are very pragmatic. I would predict it's less likely that China would follow the Washington Consensus path because they can't find a good example. I mean, if you produce a good example, maybe we'll consider.
Well,